Welcome to the State Procurement Office Training Workshop number 155, Intra and Out-of-State Travel Procedures. Travel is governed by collective bargaining agreements, Hawaii administrative rules, State Procurement Office travel guidelines and procedures, procurement circulars, comptroller memoranda, department policies and procedures. Begin bargaining units 2, 3, 4, 9, 13, and their HGEA counterparts ratified new contracts effective July 1, 2026. Among the changes are lodging, meals, and incidentals will be based on the federal allowance rates. Allowance for same-day travel or travel to remote locations is $30 per day. Per diem calculations for intrastate and out-of-state travel shall begin 90 minutes prior to flight departure and 30 minutes after the flight is scheduled to return. The Hawaii administrative rules dictate that travel rules apply to all persons employed by the state or representing the state on an official capacity, regardless of the source of funding. This includes directors, deputy directors, commissioners, and executive directors. While employees are traveling to conduct official business, they are considered on travel status. The rules also require travelers to take the most economical flight to the destination. Any personal preferences that increases the cost is the responsibility of the traveler. While on travel status, the employee is entitled to per diem, which covers lodging, meals and incidentals, and other reimbursable expenses. However, if lodging is provided at no cost to the traveler or to the state, the employee is entitled to subsistence allowance, which may include meals and incidentals. If meals are included, there may be some adjustments as well. There are only two mandatory contracts that executive branch departments are required to use: the Inter-Island Price Agreement and the Interstate Commercial Car Rental Agreement. Employees must follow the directions on each of the vendor lists to obtain the price quotes. There are some important terms you need to remember as we go through this training. Federal allowable rate is the maximum allowable reimbursable rate for lodging, meals, and incidentals. CONUS is the 48 contiguous states and the District of Columbia. OCONUS is outside of the continental U.S., including foreign and non-foreign countries like Alaska and Hawaii. M&IE, meals and incidental. Incidental expenses include tips to taxi and rideshare drivers, porters, baggage carriers, and hotel staff. Once a determination has been made for an employee to travel, the Travel Approval Form, or TAF, and the applicable worksheets must be completed. Worksheet A for airfare, Worksheet B for meals and incidentals, Worksheet C for lodging, Worksheet D for ground transportation. Let's start with the TAF. The TAF is divided into 5 sections: travel designation, employee travel information, event information, cost information, and signatures of the travelers and approving authority. We'll start with the first 3 sections. In our example, the traveler is going to Boston, Massachusetts, which is designated as CONUS. The traveler, Susie Q, is Chief Candy Maker for the Department of Confectionery and has been invited to attend the National Confectionery Training in Boston. The event starts on September 14th at 8 a.m. and ends on September 17th at 4:30 p.m. Before we get started into Worksheet A, there are a few things to remember. Airfare quotes must be based on economy class and may include a fare category that allows for seat selection. A minimum of 2 quotes from 2 different sources is required within the same day. Sources may include online travel agencies like Expedia or Travelocity, the airlines direct, or traditional travel agencies. The traveler is entitled to 1 checked bag unless justification why more is needed, and the payment should be used the P card for authorized fare. Worksheet A can be used for both intra and out-of-state travel. In our scenario, for out-of-state to Boston, I found 2 quotes, one through Expedia and the other with United Airlines. Be sure to include all the segments and all the times. As United is the cheaper of the 2, this will be the authorized fare along with the applicable baggage fees. While only 2 quotes are required for the worksheet also allows for 3 itineraries. The third itinerary may be used for any personal deviation. If not selecting the most economical airfare, it must be justified using the space provided. Besides airfare, there are other allowances and reimbursements that travelers may be entitled to. Worksheet B will be used to capture meals and incidental expenses. As previously noted, per diem will be based on the federal rates, GSA for CONUS, and the Department of Defense rates for OCONUS. On the departure and return days, the traveler is entitled to partial days based on the times leaving and returning. Let's take a look at the federal rates, beginning with the GSA rate. On the website, there are various options to select from. First, make sure you are on the current year. Keep in mind, the federal fiscal year is October through September, while the state fiscal year is July through June. You can search using the state and city, zip code, or the map. For our example, we will use the state and city. The daily lodging rate, excluding taxes, is displayed. For the month of September, the rate is $349. On the lower half of the page, the meals and incidental rates and breakdown is displayed. The daily M&IE is $92. The breakdown is $23 for breakfast, $26 for lunch, $38 for dinner, and $5 for incidental expenses. The rates selected will always be when travel commences, regardless if it crosses into another month, and the state is not using the first and last day rates. Be sure to print a copy of this page for verification and documentation. If you're looking for OCONUS, foreign countries including Hawaii, you'll be using the Department of Defense rate. Using the drop-down box, select the country. In this instance, we'll select Hawaii and submit. You can narrow the search by including the city in the keyword search bar. For our example, we will use Hilo. The layout is different. Again, it shows the maximum lodging for the entire calendar year, but there is no breakdown for local meals and local incidentals. Instead, the rate will use the local meal rate and the local incidental rates. For our example, the local meal rate is $117 and incidental is $29 per day, with the maximum lodging rate of $199 excluding taxes. The proportional meal rate will not be used. Again, be sure to print a copy of the page to document and verify the rates. When meals are adjusted, the state will use the deduction of 20% for breakfast, 30% for lunch, and 50% for dinner. Let's go through some examples. Boston is considered CONUS. In our example, the traveler is departing on September 12th at 8 p.m., returning on September 18th at 4:11 p.m. On departure day at 8 p.m. plus 90 minutes is 6:30 p.m., which still puts him in the last quarter of the day. There are 5 full days, and then on the return at 4:11 plus 30 minutes or 4:41, or the last 3/4 of the day, for a total of 6 days. The meals and incidental rate was $92. Times 6 is $552. If meals were included, and this is not a conference program, you would then deduct the meals that were included. In this instance, it's 4 breakfasts, 4 lunches, and 4 dinners. $23 times 4 breakfasts, $26 times 4 lunches, and 1 dinner at $38. The total for this scenario is $552 minus $234 for a total of $318. In our next scenario, lodging is included. Same information is putting at the top, and the computation for M and IE for CONUS, same departure, there is no full days, and the same return at $92. However, in this instance, the traveler is entitled to receive meals and incidentals. So he's entitled to 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches, 5 dinners, and 5 days of incidentals. The total would be $92 plus the $468 for a total of $552. Our next scenario is OCONUS. So let's look at the worksheet for OCONUS. This is an intrastate overnight OCONUS. We're going to Hilo, Hawaii. The local meal rate is $114. The local incidental rate is $29. In this instance, the traveler can leave at 6 a.m. the morning of the meeting and return at 7 p.m. after the meeting concludes. 6 a.m. plus 90 minutes is 4:30, so this is in the first full day. There are 2 full days in between, and since they're returning after 6 p.m., it's 1 full day. The total rate is the 117 plus the 29 for a total of 146 times 4 for a total of $484. However, if meals are included, we need to make these deductions. Again, we still have the same information: 1 departure day, 2 full days, and 1 return. But we're now deducting 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, and 2 dinners. The total for this is A minus C. And our last example will be when lodging is provided. Same scenario to Hilo: 1 departure day, 0 full days, and 1 return day. Times 2 at 146 is a total of $292. But in this situation, the employee is entitled to meal allowances: 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 2 dinners. Keeping in mind it's 20% of the local meal rates, 30% of the local lunch rate, and 50% of the local dinner rate, plus 2 days of incidentals, for a total of $292. The total for worksheet B in this scenario is A plus B. If the traveler is only doing same-day travel, Section D should be filled out. It's $30 per day, but there may be some situations where some bargaining units still use $20. Let's move on to Worksheet C. Worksheet C is used to capture lodging expenses. Again, travelers must attain a minimum of 2 quotes unless staying at a conference hotel. Then no additional rates are necessary. The federal lodging rate will be used as the benchmark to determine if excess lodging is applicable. Travelers staying with family or friends will not be reimbursed for lodging expenses, but may be entitled to meals and daily incidental rates. On Worksheet C, you fill out the top portion and also include the check-in and check-out dates. On the bottom section of the worksheet is used to calculate the nightly room rates plus taxes. In this situation, we have two hotels, the Residence Inn by Marriott and the Hyatt, both at 5 nights. The Residence Inn is $224 per night, including taxes. The Hyatt Regency is $549, including taxes. The federal maximum lodging rate is $349. In this situation, we'll assume this includes taxes. If choosing the Marriott, there is no excess lodging since the rate is below the federal maximum allowable rate. However, the Hyatt Regency, if chosen, would reflect $1,000 excess lodging. If you're not using the most economical rate, justification must be included in the space provided. In addition to airfare and hotel, ground transportation may also need to be used. Worksheet D is used to track expenses for car rentals, taxi and ride shares, shuttle, buses, and parking. If approved to rent a car intrastate, the SPO car rental price list is required. The state is self-insured, therefore no insurance is required. If the employee chooses to purchase insurance, it is at a personal expense. If approved to rent a car out of state, traveler must obtain a minimum of 2 quotes and select the most economical car and size appropriate for the number of authorized employees in the group. A car rental should be selected only if there are no other less expensive options. Employees will be allowed to purchase LDW, CDW, or PDW and claim reimbursement. Any other optional insurance is the responsibility of the employee. In this example, the employee needs a car to rent in Hilo. Since the state has a price list, only 1 quote is required. If this were an out-of-state travel, 2 quotes will be required. If a car rental is not used, the traveler could take a taxi, get a ride share, or use the airport or hotel shuttle. Whatever is used should be identified in the ground transportation cost section of the worksheet along with the other expenses. Now that the worksheets are completed, we can move on to completing the remaining portions of the TAF. The TAF is used to collect all estimated costs, travel justification, itinerary details, and necessary approvals. Once approved, the TAF does not need to be amended unless there are changes to the destination, travel dates, or purpose of the trip. Changes in price alone do not require a TAF amendment unless your department dictates otherwise. However, Worksheet A may need to be redone as the flight schedule and costs may have changed. The cost information section of the TAF should be completed with the information from the worksheet. Be sure to have the traveler sign along with their requesting authority and approving authority before final arrangements are made. Be sure to have the employee check the box and acknowledge that the personal travels may be used if they are entitled to reimbursement once the travel is completed. Time permitting, the traveler may be entitled to travel advances for hotel, meals and incidentals, and ground transportation. Requests must be submitted no earlier than 14 days and no later than 5 days prior to the date travel starts. When the employee returns from the trip, you will begin the process of completing the statement of completed travel. Within 10 days after the traveler has returned, the statement of completed travel should be submitted along with all relevant receipts and documentation. The form captures actual costs for airfare, lodging, meals, and incidental expenses, ground transportation, and other reimbursable expenses. And we'll take a look at an example for that. Most of the information is a recap of what was provided on the travel approval form. However, in the event of any changes, this should be reflected in the statement of completed travel. The travel designation, CONUS or OCONUS, interstate overnight, interstate same-day travel. The traveler's name, business and business location. How airfare was paid for, if it was by P card, or the traveler paid for it, or a third party paid for it. If it is paid by P card, this is the total airfare and baggage cost to the state. If the traveler were paying for it, then the second line would be completed, total reimbursable airfare and baggage. The next section is for meals and incidentals. Depending on your travel, CONUS or OCONUS, this needs to be completed, along with the lodging expenses taken from your Worksheet C. And the last portion is your other reimbursable expenses taken from your Worksheet D. The next section should reflect the total cost of the trip, including any reimbursements to the employee or advances to the employee. The first line should reflect everything that was paid by P card or through the state. B section is any reimbursable expenses. It could include airfare, lodging, meals, and incidentals. C would reflect any advances that was made to the employee and the amount of that advance. Then the total reimbursement or due to the state should be completed depending on what the scenario is. If the employee was paid advances in excess of expenses, this would be due to the state. In addition to the travel procedures, there are two related topics. The first one is the use of personal car to get to and from the airport. The Hawaii administrative rules state, if approved by the department head or representative, the employee may be reimbursed for miles between home and the transportation terminal, which is in excess of the miles normally traveled between home and the employee's regular pace of business. For example, the employee lives in Mililani and commutes to town, which is 22 miles in each direction. Mililani to Honolulu Airport is only 14 miles. Therefore, if going to the airport on a regular workday, the employee would not be entitled for mileage reimbursement when using a personal vehicle. Another example would be an employee who lives in Kaimuki and commutes to town, averaging 5 miles. If the employee is going to the airport, which is 10 miles away, the traveler would be entitled to mileage reimbursement of 5 miles. When claiming mileage reimbursement, travelers must refer to the Comptroller's memorandum on the current IRS standard mileage rate to determine the applicable reimbursement rate. The other travel-related provision is travel time off for same-day travel. This only applies to employees who qualify for overtime, and calculations start 30 minutes prior to flight departure and ends when the flight is expected to return to the home airport. Travel time off is calculated at 1.5 times, rounded to the nearest quarter hour. For our example, the employee's regular schedule is 7:45 to 4:30. He is scheduled to travel from Honolulu to Hilo on a flight at 6:05 a.m., returning at 5:51 p.m. 30 minutes prior to 6:05 is 5:35, which is 130 minutes prior to his regular start time. On the return, the normal ending time is 4:30, but the flight does not get back to Honolulu until 5:51, which is 81 minutes after his regular day. In total, there is 211 minutes of travel time off, times 1.5, which equals 316.5 minutes, or 5.25 hours. There is a form on the SPO website to assist in calculating travel time off. Additional information can be found on the SPO website under Programs for State and County Personnel. If you should have any further questions, please contact Sharon Ota or Christopher Ramonde or email the State Procurement Office mailbox. Mahalo.